program. So I think we are a little bit early to start, but we would like to start as soon as possible with a keynote. So I would like to introduce our first keynote speaker, Dr. Nicha Selvon-Ramkissoon. The title of her keynote is Translanguaging as a Pedagogy of Hope, Empowering Migrant Students in Linguistically Diverse Classroom. Dr. Nicha Selvon-Ramkissoon is an assistant professor and general administrator at the Center for Education Programs, University of UTT, University of Trinidad and Tobago. She has published in the areas of language arts, curriculum development, second language dialect pedagogy, critical discourse studies, postcolonial readings of literary text, indigenous methodologies, the language of soca music, and translanguaging pedagogy for migrant children. Just on a personal note, I met Nicha over 20 years ago. She was also my lecturer here at UWI in linguistics. And we worked together in many projects to support migrant children in Trinidad and Tobago. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we worked together in, sorry about that, supporting migrant children in Trinidad and Tobago. We have, but I will not say much because Nicha will talk about that in her presentation. So it is a great honor for me to welcome Dr. Selvon-Ramkissoon as our first keynote speaker.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to the conference organizers for inviting me to do this keynote. I want to say especially thank you to the interpreters. I could not do what Dr. Roberts just did, so I appreciate the interpreters being here to have our Spanish-speaking guests hear this keynote as well. So as you can see, the title of my talk is Translanguaging as a Pedagogy of Hope, Empowering Students in Linguistically Diverse Classrooms. So I want to start this talk by asking you to imagine Trinidad and what Trinidad would have been in the 1800s. So by the time Trinidad became a formal British colony in 1802, its linguistic landscape was already shaped by 3 languages from 8 groups of First Peoples during the pre-Columbian period, then by European languages of the island's Spanish and English colonizers, and French, German, and Scottish planters. There were also a number of West African languages spoken by enslaved groups who were brought to work on the plantations, languages like Yoruba, Igbo, Congo, and Mandinka. Finally, Chinese, Portuguese, Syrian, Lebanese, and Indian indentured laborers were brought to the islands by the British in the post-emancipation period to work on the estates, and they too brought their languages with them. French Creole and English Creoles were developed in the region and spoken alongside the other languages by the descendants of transplanted peoples on the island. But these were labeled as broken languages because of the different grammatical structures they had to their English and French lexifier languages. This polyglot population prompted Gamble to write, "There are men from all quarters of the globe, and with little exaggeration, it may be said that in Trinidad, all the languages of the earth are spoken." Lee Swiner notes that this multilingual situation existed despite the fact that English had by then been the colony's official language for over 40 years. So I'm asking you to think about 2 questions in relation to Trinidad at that time. 1, how did people with their dozens of languages in the colony of Trinidad communicate with each other in their communities, on their streets, in other public spaces? And two, how did the British eventually maneuver the English language to the top of an imposed language hierarchy? So for the first question, how did people with their many languages talk to each other? In the 1800s, people in Trinidad did what multilingual populations have always done to communicate. They used all of their language experiences, skills, and practices to connect with others. Ignoring language labels, they created intersections for communication and built on their interactions with each other to formulate dynamic models of meaning making. They also developed as bilinguals, bidialectals, and multilinguals. They may not necessarily have had native competence in languages other than their mother tongue, but they kept languaging. That is, they kept building their individual linguistic repertoires. This naturally occurring practice can be described as translanguaging, defined by Ortega et al. As using one's idiolect, that is one's repertoire, without regard for socially and politically defined language labels or boundaries. There's been extensive documentation of this practice of translanguaging, even in contemporary societies. For example, in Ambele and Todd's article, Translanguaging Patterns in Everyday Urban Conversations in Cameroon, they conduct a quantitative corpus-based study to understand the patterns of Cameroonians when they engage in conversation. Cameroon is a highly multilingual country with over 285 languages being used. But even for the sample in the study, the researchers found that when conversing, the participants naturally, participants naturally and spontaneously deployed a full range of their linguistic resources, and that in fact, the participants' linguistic choices are so deeply intertwined, fused into each other, and deployed in the conversation as a single resource without any regard whatsoever for linguistic boundaries. A good analogy for understanding this concept of translanguaging is the balloon iceberg metaphor. Right. If we view languages as separate, distinct entities with fixed boundaries, much like the balloons in the first picture, this could potentially promote erroneous ideas. For example, that the languages in someone's brain are detached and do not share a common base. Another wrong idea that comes from this balloon metaphor is that each balloon or language must be inflated or learned and maintained separately from the others, and that as one language is learned or inflated, the others deflate. Ortega, Garcia, and Reed, on the other hand, use an iceberg metaphor to illustrate the relationship between a person's visible language use and their underlying linguistic competence. So as you can see from the other picture, the tips of the iceberg above the water represent the surface level observable language use of bilinguals or bidialectals. The large body of the iceberg below the water represents the bilingual individual's single, unified, and dynamic linguistic repertoire competence. This vast underlying system is the source from which a speaker draws all of their linguistic features, the vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, gestures, etc., to make meaning in any given situation, regardless of which named language they appear to be using on the surface. Our foreparents did this in the 18th and 19th century Trinidad, and people in bilingual and multilingual contexts continue to do this till today. If translanguaging then is a naturally occurring linguistic phenomena, this begs the second question of how the British were able to disrupt this translanguaging process and eventually realize its English-only agenda. It didn't happen right away. Trinidadians at the time resisted that policy. But the British were able to achieve this agenda mainly through education policy, because they understood that for their colonial project to be successful, they had to acknowledge the power of language in creating the desired society. The teaching of English was thus used to prepare students to function as good colonials, prompting the adage, school was English and English was the school. Indeed, from the time formal education was introduced on the islands in the mid-19th century, the curriculum was determined by the requirements of a British education, with English being stated as the language of instruction. Pennycook describes the interface between colonialism and language policy in this way. Policies about providing or withholding an education in English were not simple questions to do with the medium of instruction, but rather were concerned with different views on how best to run a colony. Thus began, according to Barkant, a strictly regimented and institutionalized system of language imposition and constitutional engineering. In 1835, as part of the Emancipation Agreement, the Negro Education Grant was dispensed by the British government for compulsory primary school education for the children of ex-slaves. The first batch of teachers was recruited for these religious board schools from England. Although the Roman Catholic schools were pressed upon by the governments of Britain and Trinidad to, one, refrain from teaching their religion, and two, not use Spanish or French in the schools, these Roman Catholic schools generally ignored those both mandates in the first half of the 19th century. They did, however, in practice, agree that non-European languages should be used in the classroom. Between the late 1840s and early 1850s, serious attention was given by the then governor of Trinidad, Lord Harris, to establish a secular primary school system based on the ward arrangement, with a teacher training school set up in 1852. Needless to say, this anglicized model of education placed English as the language at the center of formal pedagogy, with an emphasis on inculcating English values in the students. During 1835 to 1869, 5 same-sex secondary schools were established in Port of Spain, mainly for the wealthy, essentially white population of the island. The Roman Catholic schools catered mainly to the French Creoles, and French was used alongside English as a language of instruction. However, according to Carl Campbell, the Queen's Collegiate School was to be a cultural lever of Anglicization to the detriment of the French Creole tradition on the island. Regardless of the home languages of these students at secondary school, English remained the medium of instruction. French was taught as a foreign language, but Spanish was not taught because by that time, Spanish was no longer considered one of the great nations of Europe. So even the Spanish language could not make the cut in this new British classical education system. From the 1870s onward, more denominational primary schools were founded, including the Canadian Presbyterian missions, which sought to convert, through education, the Muslim and Hindu children of the Indian laborers. Teachers of the Presbyterian schools were required to understand both English and Hindi to accommodate their Indian students, who, in the words of Reverend Morton, were seen as, quote, Anglo-Saxons toasted in the sun. All of these efforts, of course, were motivated by the underlying intention of religious conversion and English adoption. The quest to anglicize through language education was thus extended to the children of enslaved and indentured laborers. A century later, both the Marriott-Mayhew Commission of 1931 and the Moyne Commission of 1939 proposed shifts in curricula from the then outdated British classical model to a more modern, technically and culturally relevant one. This was met initially with resistance from the public, and Allen reports, quote, aroused a good deal of local opposition on the mistaken ground that it was designed to lower the education of the people. By this time, the island of Tobago had formally become a ward of the colony of Trinidad and Tobago. So for both islands, proficiency in English was presented by those in power as the epitome of privileged education and upward mobility. Thus, hegemonic mechanisms also co-opted descendants of transplanted people into routinely legitimizing language policies and attitudes that marginalize their own ways of knowing and communicating. That is why someone like me, whose great-grandparents spoke Kalina, French Creole, Yoruba, Spanish, and Bhojpuri, lost all of those languages on account of my privileged British education. And no doubt many of you have similar experiences. Today, English is still the official language of education in Trinidad and Tobago, but the island's Creoles dominate the language ecology of our schools. Most Trinbagonian children then are bidialectal. Their linguistic repertoires and competence move between standard and Creole dialects of English. Additionally, classrooms are comprised of minority groups of students who have as their first language indigenous languages like Trinidad and Tobago Sign Language, or languages of their immigrant parents like Mandarin, Arabic, and Spanish. How then can we mirror communal translanguaging practices that occurred in the 1800s within the classroom today? For starters, we need to acknowledge that all of our learners, whether they are bidialectal, bilingual, or multilingual speakers, along all parts of a bilingual continuum, have a complete linguistic system. They have a full linguistic repertoire that is their own. We need to value students' idiolects, which reflect their holistic languaging, which they develop from interactions in their homes, places of worship, the community, extracurricular activities, etc. We need to use their linguistic repertoires, leveraging that language stock, according to Senos and Gorter, to improve language and content competencies at school. The basis of this trans-languaging pedagogy is to disrupt the idea that languages are separate codes tied to power, which is a legacy of colonization, and instead to affirm multilingual identities, challenge monolingual norms, and center indigenous knowledge by recognizing students' full linguistic repertoires as assets and not as deficits. The extensive literature on translanguaging analyzes this phenomenon in communities and classrooms across the globe and offers theoretical frames and methodologies for scholarly scrutiny. You can see a sample of researchers in the first column who describe within qualitative and quantitative models how community translanguaging is enacted in Cameroon, various islands of the Caribbean, Italy, and Sweden. From the second column, Bonaccia Pugh et al. Identify the fixed and fluid language approaches as two ways in which translanguaging has been conceptualized, and recommend ethnographic methodologies for further studies. Duarte and Gunther van der Mee created a designer-based interventions project in which teachers and researchers together develop multilingual activities in the Netherlands. Eden and Sally summarize the theoretical underpinnings of translanguaging, and Kali et al. Give guidelines for the design of an instructional unit for translanguaging pedagogy in Brazil. As we can see from the third column, the literature is also replete with perceptions of lived experiences from children and students and other school personnel who engage in translanguaging pedagogy. The general consensus from studies conducted in Pakistan, South Africa, Dominica, Australia, Sri Lanka, Germany, Italy, Thailand, Dubai, and Greece, is that when translanguaging is facilitated in the classroom, there is enhanced metalinguistic awareness and cognitive development among students. Social relationships are built through identity affirmation and inclusion, and all participants broaden their cultural awareness and sensitivity. Of course, there are challenges in enacting translanguaging pedagogy. VARSAT 2025 notes challenges like resistance to change on account of monolingual policies or personal ideas about language purism and appropriateness. Teachers and other practitioners may feel overwhelmed and under-supported in translanguaging pedagogy implementation, and there may be resource constraints in lower-income educational districts. VARSAT and other researchers, though, make recommendations for these challenges and document the successes of these interventions. I don't want you to think, though, that grassroots resistance to language imperialism happened everywhere else in post-colonial states except in Trinidad and Tobago. The very survival of English Creoles as vernaculars on the islands, in spite of the contempt leveled against them for centuries, is even more impressive when you consider that these linguistic systems, Caribbean Creoles, were themselves forged by communal translanguaging. In the 1960s and 70s, Caribbean linguists embarked on awareness campaigns that formalized accommodation of Creoles in classroom interactions, and through the developing and implementation of more inclusive curricular documents, these efforts continue until today. French Creole, too, is a minority language that is taught in a couple of primary schools in the hills of Paramin and used for some liturgical services in the Catholic Church of that community. Caribbean linguists have commented on the changing attitudes of Trinbagonians from total disdain towards the corrupt Creoles, supposedly spoken by an educated lower caste, to the embracing of Creoles as their own roots language. Dergesing 2025, for example, notes that in the English official Caribbean, such feelings have begun to gradually shift in recent times, as the native-born populations have increasingly acknowledged Creoles as socially powerful identity markers. Part of the reason for this has been advocacy on the part of native-born linguists in the post-colonial period. The steady influx of migrants from Venezuela and other Spanish-speaking official countries in the region also provide more opportunities for translanguaging pedagogy. Over the past 7 years or so, collaborations between the University of the West Indies and international organizations like UNICEF and PADF were undertaken to support local organizations like the Living Water Community and the Catholic Education Board of Management, who were providing interim educational opportunities for migrant children who were not yet afforded accommodations within the formal education system. 2 curriculum guides were created. You can see them there. The first one, Curriculum for Spanish-Speaking Migrant Children of Trinidad and Tobago, CLIL Approach. And the second one, CLIL Supplemental Guide for Lower Primary Schools in Trinidad and Tobago, 5 to 9 years old. These curricular documents adopted the content and language integrated learning, or CLIL approach, educational approach. And you can probably see there the 5 C's of CLIL, or the focus of a CLIL educational approach: competence, communication, content, cognitive, and community. The team focused on 3 linguistic foundations to undergird the development of these 2 curricular documents. The first thing they focused on was respect and retention of Spanish students L1, the Spanish language that they came to Trinidad with. 2, the adoption of a trans-language pedagogy. So in other words, in creating curriculum, in creating resources, in creating lesson plans, trans-languaging was the focus. And 3, closely related to trans-languaging, the inclusion of a biliteracy program. So students were to be taught to read both in English and in Spanish. After the first set of teachers in these schools were trained in CLIL and trans-languaging, they too worked with a team to pilot and edit these curricula and to create effective lesson plans for all subject areas. They used the National Primary School Curriculum of Trinidad and Tobago for content and learning outcomes across all subject areas. The development team was always cognizant of the importance of inclusive and decolonizing practices, understanding as Eisenclaw 2013 explains, quote, insufficient support for home languages deprives children of the recognized educational, social, and affective advantages associated with bilingualism and can hinder intergenerational cohesion within families and communities. During this conference, from the various presentations, you will hear more about teacher training that continues until now. You will see the results of quantitative and qualitative documented feedback from participants concerning teacher and student attitudes. You will hear of successes and challenges of recent activities and also future plans for trans-languaging projects. Since practitioners sometimes report resource constraints for bilingual and bidialectal students, the team worked on bilingual charts that covered both languages across various curriculum content. We also created videos that would reflect linguistic context into which new students would be immersed. 2 child-friendly characters were crafted to teach areas of the curriculum through episodic plots. I'm going to show you the first video that we created for children now entering primary school. The infant year 1 curriculum content topics of common courtesies for English language arts, developing a number sense in math, saying greetings in Spanish, and school rules for social studies were all reviewed in this video.
Idiom. Anna. Idiom. Anna. Idiom, 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 idiom. Anna, 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 Anna. Idiom, 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 idiom. Anna, 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 Anna. Idiom. Anna. Idiom. Anna.
Hands high, hands low. Touch your head, touch your toes. Hands high, hands low. Touch your head, touch your toes. Hello, boys and girls.
Hello, Messi. What's the scene? Huh? What is the scene? What? What is the scene is how we say hello sometimes in Trinidad and Tobago. What is the scene means hello. How you doing today? What is the scene?
What is the scene?
I good. I cool. I normal.
Hola, me llamo Ana.
Miss, help this girl, miss. She's sick. She's sick. Bad, miss. She's sick. Bad, miss. She's sick, bad.
Idiom. When you want to speak, you must raise your hand.
Sí, cuando quieres hablar en clase debes levantar la mano.
Yes, idiom?
Miss, you hearing this girl, miss? I think she is sick.
Why?
She is not talking properly.
She is just fine, idiom. Anna is from Venezuela. Anna speaks Spanish.
Spanish?
Sí, idiom.
See what, miss?
Sí means yes in Spanish.
Oh, I see. See means yes.
Sí.
Sí?
See, miss.
Sí, profesora.
Professora?
Profesor is the word for teacher.
Oh, so miss, you are a professora?
Sí.
Pues, I like Spanish.
¿Cómo te llamas?
She is asking, what is your name?
¿Cómo te llamas? What is your name? She is asking me to say my name. Yes, my name is Idiom. Are you looking for fun? I have some. Here comes fun in 3, 2, 1. ¿Cómo te llamas?
Me llamo Ana. I am from Venezuela and I love lots of laughter.
Me too.
Yes, idiom?
Profesora, you need to go to the bathroom.
Oh, I see. What do we say when we need to go to the bathroom?
We say, excuse me.
Excuse me, excuse. I need to go to the bathroom.
Go on.
Miss, where is the bathroom? Today was my first day of school and it was fun.
See, I learned some new things and how they are done.
Like hands high, hands low.
And what's the scene?
I just school.
That is the next way to greet your friends in school.
I learned that you must raise your hands when it is time to speak.
And if you need to leave the class, say, excuse me.
Excuse me.
Are you leaving?
Yes, I am going home to eat.
Oh, well, goodbye.
Yeah. Later. That is our next way to say goodbye, Anna. Later.
Ah, later?
Yeah, later. I look into press. Press. Press means I am leaving.
Well, goodbye. Let's us press.
No. I press. You stay. You cannot get any of my food at home. I am pressing alone.
No, we're pressing together.
No, Anna. You cannot come home and eat no food by me. I'm pressing alone.
We're pressing together.
Listen, Anna. I am pressing.
We're pressing
No,
together.
press alone.
Together. Yes, together.
Idiom.
Ana.
Idiom.
Ana.
Right, so I'm sure you noticed the interactions of Trinidad and Tobago Standard English, Trinidadian Creole, and Spanish among the speakers in the video. Both Anna and Idiom drew from their full linguistic repertoire without constraint, using their competencies to build on their languaging even more. Other videos made for children at the Living Water community covered PE, vapor, science, etc., from infant 1 straight on to standard 3, using these same 2 characters. So as the children grew, they grew with these characters. The videos continue to cover curriculum content, and they also tackle topics vital to vulnerable migrant groups, like the lesson from the Values, Character, and Citizens Education, or VCCE subject, the lesson of good touch, bad touch. Garcia, Johnson, and Seltzer in 2017 identified 3 strands to translanguaging pedagogy: a translanguaging stance, a translanguaging design, and translanguaging shifts. First, to construct a translanguaging classroom, a juntos or together stance is necessary. So a collaborative, self-justice oriented approach where educators and researchers work together with students becomes the ideological stance. Educators view their students' entire linguistic repertoires as a strength rather than focusing on single separate languages. They value the students' whole selves and move beyond colonial language ideologies to empower students through flexible critical language use. Additionally, teachers' translanguaging stance encompasses their own critical understandings about how named languages have been manipulated to fulfill colonial agendas. Second, teachers' translanguaging instructional design engages students as active learners, assembling the different ways they make meaning of their worlds. When they redesign the learning environment in this way, teachers also open the way to more student agency to interrogate traditional language practices and ideologies that impede their own learning. Third, because a translanguaging pedagogy ultimately stems from the speaker up and not from the language down, teachers enact translanguaging shifts, adjusting to a fluid translanguaging corriente or flow of multilingual learners. This is corriente is a term that Garcia coined to acknowledge the spontaneous and impromptu performances and emergent quality of translanguaging. An educator who is able to shift in response to bilingual students' dynamic translanguaging transforms traditional standards and curricula into a pedagogy that liberates students' language to think, imagine, feel, and learn. The Caribbean's colonizer-colonized relationship with European languages has had many implications for pervasive language attitudes and discourses about language policies, including, according to Ferreira, quote, a long-standing intolerance towards multilingualism in small island states. The ideal outcome for migrant students is for them to be eventually integrated into public primary and secondary school systems, since according to UNICEF 2020, the sooner students can engage in mainstream education systems, the more likely they are to be able to integrate into mainstream society and establish new bonds of affiliation. This integration, of course, can have a two-way benefit. Local students will also have an enriched school experience in a system that promotes linguistic diversity and that celebrates multilingualism. Working towards a translanguaging pedagogy in Trinidad and Tobago means that we will be making space for local students' bilingualism and ways of knowing. We will be supporting migrant students' bilingual identities, socio-emotional development, and intergenerational cohesion. We will be creating opportunities for all students to develop in a multilingual education space. And ultimately, we will be generating a decolonized system of education, moving away from the idea that a single language holds inherent power towards the power of students' entire linguistic repertoires. As migrant children slowly transfer into mainstream public schools, how wonderful it would be if they could move seamlessly into translanguaging classrooms with local children, where ethical pedagogy could provide hope and empowerment for all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Selvon-Ramkissoon, for her presentation, keynote that he had given us. I open the floor in case you would like to have some questions for Dr. Nicha. The main points, he talk about the history in Trinidad and Tobago in language, how different languages have come together, and the creativity of, I would say, all the speakers in Trinidad and Tobago, and how there's interaction, or how these different languages, diverse languages, came together to what we have now, Trinidad English Creole. So, and we have that by a dialectal society. I don't know if any one of you would like to ask any to Dr. Nicha Selvon-Ramkissoon.
Okay, so I guess if you have a question or a comment, just come forward. Nicha, thank you so very much. That was absolutely wonderful. You mentioned, there was a quote by Ferreira toward the end, and I was a little bit lost and at the same time perplexed, because you said that, thank you, you said that, that there was an intolerance for, or an intolerance of multilingualism. So I guess my question is, what accounts for that, and how do you see us moving forward and changing that that tone or that way of thinking? We got the movable mic.
Oh, now we can hear. Yes, right. Yes, I thought that Ferreira quote was very powerful too, because of that English-only project. I think she was referring to that. The English-only project is the thing that makes us feel, and not just us, other post-colonial states that were under the British, makes us feel that once we speak English, why do we need anything else? And if you come here, learn English. Even as we speak, our own Trinidadian Creole. We see that in the United States. If you come here, speak American, that sentiment is expressed here. So I think she was speaking to that because of that English-only project, there is that disdain, and it's really sad in small island states where the loss that comes because of that, the loss of heritage languages, is what resulted. But of course, projects like these, translanguaging, the work that has been done by linguists in the 70s and up until today to advocate for indigenous languages, spoken languages, sign languages, that's the way forward, I think.
Thanks. And Nicha, first I'd like to congratulate you on the speech. It took us through history and made some important connections for us. But I'm going to ask a question that might be described as woke. Because I can see someone looking at the video and questioning the naming, idiom, idiot, the use of humor to typify the sole use of Creole, and maybe some negative perceptions of a black character fooling around in the classroom.
Yeah.
And I wondered if that perhaps could be reconsidered.
Yeah. I didn't have time to say this, but the reason these two people were chosen, well, you recognize Darren Salandi. Idiom is his character online. This is a character that children should maybe familiar with. Idiom for language. Maybe he acted like an idiot, but his online, his own page, his own, whatever you call that, his idiom, and he uses that character to do things in his own social media space. So I guess the idea was students would be familiar with him, with that character. And the person who plays Anna is a psychologist in that community, a child psychologist. So the two characters were chosen, I think, because of their familiarity. But certainly those points are valid. And there are, as they did videos going along till Standard 3, I think some of the humor fell on Anna as well. The idea was that it's okay to make mistakes, but I do see what you're saying. It's not woke, it's actually quite valid points. I think in isolation, it doesn't give a full picture of all the videos. You know, yeah, there were several that were made for the both characters, but certainly when you do projects like these, it's good to get feedback like that.
Buenas tardes a todos. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to firstly say that I wholeheartedly embrace the idea of translanguaging as a pedagogy of hope. I would like to extend it even further and say that it is more than a pedagogy of hope. It is a humanity-oriented pedagogy. And when we think of someone's identity, language plays such a critical role in identity formation and identity maintenance. So it is a step in the right direction. I want to, however, ask about, in terms of when we think of schooling and the context of education, we cannot divorce it from assessment. Now, while classroom practices will be geared towards promoting translanguaging, is it going to be extended to the context of assessment, where we will have translanguaging-oriented assessment? Because at the end of the day, the objective of education and schooling is to test. So that is something that definitely has to be considered within the framework of translanguaging in education. So while we are developing the classroom practices and promoting the classroom practices, it's also important to consider the assessment component of the framework. Thank you.
Buenas a todos. I am Kina. I am not only a registered and practicing teacher in our school system here under the Ministry of Education. I am also a bilingual presenter, media personality of my own talk show, Aki Konkina. And piggybacking on her comment, I have seen the reality of translanguaging in class being a hope. Or what I've tried to do while teaching is to help them connect when and where can we use our dialect. So I will say things like this. Okay, so what word is this? The word on the board is THE. They will naturally say the. We will tell them, no, it's the. So I will tell them, okay, yes, it's the and the. They will look at me confused. And then I would say, when you're in the community and you're by your neighbor, you can say the dog outside there. But when we're in school, we have to say the dog is sitting there, all right? But I let them know that they can hold on to their culture, they can hold on to their language, and they can also differentiate when and where to use it. So when she mentioned, how are we going to include that in the learning? It's so funny because we do tell them when we are in school, when we are addressing people of authority, we have to use this language, the standard English. Then when you came with your presentation, I was like, but this is a kind of mental slavery here. Mm-hmm. They want me to talk this way, they want me to say this way. And I like how you showed us how it became the official language for our country, because you had to have a strategy. You wanted to win, you put it where everybody is considered important in inverted commas. So just to summarize, because I put a few thoughts there, that's where my mind goes. When it comes to learning, I think we will get there, because maybe, just like how we have VCCE and VAPA and all these non-heavy, I would want to say critical, but the ones are not so heavily academic, we can have the opportunity now to have a subject that nurtures our culture in primary school level, not just when you have to choose subjects or when you're choosing your path. Maybe they could do that, something to consider. But I enjoy being part of these seminars, and I've seen when we allow our children, because I teach in a school where there are a lot of social issues, and naturally children do not speak standard English. And when they are able to hold on to something they have without feeling like if it's of lesser value, they learn better. They are more interactive, they are more participating, and I wish we have done this a lot sooner. Thank you.
I think I'm just going to refer to what the participant referred to about assessment. Now, a lot of emphasis is being placed on practice, translanguaging pedagogy, and how we get our teachers to get the students to, to incorporate that and so on. So the next step should be to focus on assessment. How are we going to assess this, and spend some real time now? Because I think we're getting the idea of translanguaging as being something that's valuable, effective, and all of that as practice, all right? So we can spend some time now looking at the assessment. How are we going to assess it and get some team looking at that, and has it been done away, and we know how to do that, all right? So I think it's something that advocacy in that regard would be quite useful. Huh?
Yeah.
Future-proofing translanguaging, yes.
Buenas tardes a todos y gracias por tu presentación. Hi everyone, I am Ambrosia, a linguist student and also in Spanish. I just want to say thank you so much for your presentation. My exam today was partially on this. Everyone had such great feedback. And I love how this lady here, I don't know your name, beautiful and orange hair. I love how she brought up the facts concerning the perception of the characters. I am actually familiar with, I think his name is Darren, so like I understood his character and whatnot. But her opinion was so important because it is linked to language attitudes of how a lot of persons would perceive and understand our English, Trinidadian English, and when we are trying to educate it, right? So also as a young student slash teacher on the side that does bilingual, well, I guess you could say trilingual if I do standard English, Trinidadian English, Creole, and Spanish. So I help migrants learn English as well as understanding. I believe this lady in the jacket said it here, saying that, okay, this is standard English, and when you're in the community settings, this is how you say it. So it's always so refreshing to hear and be in a room of persons that wants the same goal and wants to really bring awareness that Trinidadian English Creole is not just a broken language. It's not just a variety that should be limited to community languages alone. But we all understand that it's a language that unites us in solidarity, that gives us identity, and plays a crucial role. However, in official capacities, that's when we need to put down that identity and pick up the British identity in speaking a certain way, carrying ourselves a certain way, because it's a quote-unquote language of success and prestige. And even coming back to the assessments, right? I personally think that on paper, it's a great idea to think about, okay, well, how are we going to go about assessing these? So in my classes, what I do, I assess them on both languages because I understand that this is your native language, and then this is what I'm teaching you. So in order for you to comprehend the entirety of it, I do that assessment. But in my opinion, and what I've seen based on being in certain rooms, is that the language policies of it and the actual effort it requires of each individual in those rooms to make a singular change, then to come together as a united front to create that change. Because we could be here and we could say we want change, but then when it's actually required of us to stand and be that change, that's where it differs. And that's where we might experience another century of the same discussion, and little to no change might actually happen. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Before you say, there's a lot, so I'll take your thing, but could I just comment on, because a lot of things were said. So I gather the comments so far about assessment and also classroom practice. And I think we're all agreeing that in the classroom, all languages are welcome, and students' entire linguistic repertoires should be there to negotiate not just language, but curriculum content. I think that was one of the things that I wanted to, that I hope came out, that even as students are languaging and building their linguistic repertoire, they're also learning content, right? In early childhood centers, they learn content through play. In this, with this pedagogy, they learn content through languaging. That's the idea. So it's not as if this is happening as an experiment, but they can't do exams and so forth because the content isn't being learned. But far be it from me to also laud the assessment practices we have in this country. So that's a whole other topic, and I am not saying that translanguaging is going to solve the problems we have with assessment, because the problems there are systemic. Even without translanguaging, children are struggling with exams. So that's it. In terms of classroom practice, the idea is for us not even to focus too much on the named languages, right? It's a strange thing to wrap our heads around, but that is the result. That is the hope, that as students are interacting, they're not even thinking, is this Spanish, is this French, is this Creole? What they're doing is languaging, they're learning, they're talking, they're building. And again, when we do create resources, we have to, yes, think about perceptions. And I think, again, in its entirety, one of the things that we wanted to show was that no matter what language you came into the classroom with, there would be funny moments, there would be misinterpretations, but that's okay. That's all part of languaging. Yes. I know somebody in the back wanted to. Sorry.
I have the mic, so I think.
Oh, yes, so yes. Sorry, yeah.
Should stand up? I'll stand up.
Yes, yeah.
Thank you so much, Nicha. Wonderful presentation. I loved it. One of the things I loved about it was the way in which you took a historical perspective, in which migration is not a problem, a problem that we have to deal with now. Migration is normal, in which multilingualism, different ways of languaging, is not a new idea, but an old thing that people have been doing in the Caribbean forever. I was thinking, as somebody said, let's hope that in 100 years we're not in the same place that we are in now. But I think one thing I took from your presentation was, you look back 150 years, 100 years, very different to how it is now. And that was a result of deliberate decisions and policy changes which made the education and the society that we live in now. And if that could be done, it could be done in reverse as well. One last thing I wanted to add to it was another thing I found really inspiring about what you were talking about was this seems to connect to questions of Caribbean connection as well. So when you talk about Spanish and you talk about Patois and you talk about indigenous languages, these are languages that connect us to our neighbors in Guyana and Haiti and all around the Caribbean. And I feel like what you're talking about has the potential. You know, you didn't address this as here's a solution to migrant children or something like that, as a much bigger thing. And I think it does open up much bigger and exciting possibilities. And for, say, disabled kids or kids who language in all kinds of different ways, whether it's because they're deaf and they use a sign language, whether it's because they're non-verbal, or because they have a stutter, or their language in all kinds of diverse and different ways, it occurs to me that the model that you're describing is a wonderful approach to inclusion very, very generally, and special education and all of that. So sorry, no question, but thank you.
Thanks, yeah.
Thanks. Thank you very much. And what I want to ask is, to what degree is our government supporting this project?
Well, okay, well, no, actually, no, there's good news on that front. I felt a little sad because I know part of the issue is that very slowly, the process of migrant children getting into schools is just too slow. So that was the first thing that I thought about. But we've had, UWI has had training of teachers in translanguaging several times. In some of the presentations, you'll hear that. I have not been on a lot of those training sessions, but people here in this room have done that, have been facilitators in that training. And the training has been sanctioned by the Ministry of Education. So it's not something that is happening without reference to policy framing. But again, two things. Grassroots movements are how things get done. And that it's important that we do it this way, have training and discussions and disagreements on the ground before we do policy, because as we see, mandates don't work. People ignore mandates if they don't want to do it, you know. And this is what the British found, that they mandated people to do English only. It didn't work. For 40 years, it didn't work. They had to reverse it and do things differently through education, make things seem more desirable, so that at the end of the day, we ourselves will be fighting not to speak our indigenous languages. So we have to, the change has to start on the grassroots level first, and then policy would make sense. I know this lady in the orange dress at the back wanted to ask a question a long time. Oh, sorry, you have it.
Hi, good evening, Camila Moraine. I was really pleased to hear your presentation. And one of the things that I actually wanted to ask about is the future of translanguaging. I honestly, when I was listening to you, I was thinking a lot about Haiti and Haitian Creole, and how substantive of a force it is linguistically and culturally for Haitian people. The fact that it's been formalized, it has a written form, that it's used officially in schools, in text, intellectual writings, books, judgments in courts, everything handed down, written in Creole. And I know that there was a focus on assessment, but one of the things that I was thinking about is how can then translanguaging be used as a force for us to create a knowledge in languages and identities that are more familiar to us as Caribbean people, and then that reinforce our identities, and if there's any work happening in this space at the moment.
Yeah. If the one thing that the Venezuelan migration wave showed us is that we know how to translanguage in the communities. we are doing that all the time. You know, we have neighbors or people we meet in the service sector who are Spanish speaking, and we figure it out. So, and then, of course, Haiti is a very good example of when policy gets involved and when there are actual structures in place to support trans-language and pedagogy, how successful it could be. So I think we can take comfort in the fact that in the community we trans-language, and we can transfer that into practices at the school. And once we do that at the grassroots level, we keep training teachers, we keep and then teachers themselves are involved in the creating of their own lessons and their own resources to do that. The trans-languaging will happen in the schools as well.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I was just pondering on the whole assessment issue and the take of trans-languaging moving forward. And I'm thinking, because I deliberate a lot on trans-languaging in everyday practice, and as a former school principal, I just want to say the trans-languaging isn't about actually, okay, I wouldn't say that. The trans-languaging is about getting the content to be understood. That's basically what it is. You have to understand it in order to internalize it, in order to reproduce it. So you don't necessarily have to do assessment in trans-languaging, but if you understand the content, you're a Spanish speaker, you are Creole, whatever, the content is in standard English, but I get you to understand in your whichever language you understand in what it means. Then you can take it from there. It becomes now a thought, and then you can now transfer that thought into your own words because you have internalized it. And that is how the assessment, we don't really have to focus as assessment as a tool in trans-languaging, but the understanding of the practice, using it to get the knowledge into the individual. It doesn't matter which individual, it doesn't matter which language, whether they're verbal or non-verbal, it doesn't matter. The fact, the use of trans-languaging, from my knowledge, is just to get the understanding of the content. And after that, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, then it can be easier for any student, young or old, to be able to move forward in whatever they're learning. So that is what I believe it is going forward.
Yeah, thanks Siobhan for that, for saying more elegantly what I try to say. If I know Siobhan, you'll say it to me. Actually, the person who coined the term for education, because I think what I tried to do was show trans-language in a communal way, but also for education. The Welsh guy, remember what's his name? Right, Williams. What he did is similar to what Siobhan is suggesting. So the content was taught in Welsh, and then they could respond in English or they could respond in Welsh. They could write, and this is, I mean, what people here do in their classrooms. They have to teach Shakespeare. They tell students, write this scene in Trini, enact this scene in Trini, answer the questions in English. This is the classroom practice.
So thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Selvon-Ramkissoon, for such a wonderful presentation.